put God first.
Your presence in their lives gives them validation.
Our children don't need us to be superheroes.
If you do these things, the next generation and the generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one we have today.
Men, stand up, be fathers.
Hey guys, it's Mark, your host and founder of The Inspired Legacy. As always, this is the show that equips and inspires men just like you to unleash your inner lion and reveal your true purpose as spiritual leaders in your home. Well, if you're listening to this episode fresh off of its release, then you know that we're just days away from celebrating our nation's Independence Day. And I guess my apologies to those who don't call the United States their home. I know there are a few of you out there. But hopefully you'll stick around because there are some good lessons in today's show that transcend our nation's borders. But again, since we're just days away from the 4th, I thought it would be appropriate to give a nod to our nation's military because if it weren't for them, obviously we would not have a nation to celebrate. So today, I'm talking with Major Jordan Northrup, a 17-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Jordan joined the Corps after the terror attacks on 9/11 and during his career has served 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He has led men through the hells of urban combat, conducting over 200 combat missions and survived not 1, but 2 close calls with IEDs. But the most difficult struggles in Jordan's life have not been on the battlefield, but against his 20-year addiction with alcohol. After years of relying on his own strength to find freedom from the bottle, Jordan ultimately beat his addiction when he fully surrendered himself to God and claimed his identity in Jesus Christ. Jordan details this journey in his book called The War Inside: Finding Victory Over Alcohol. Now, a lot of you know that I'm a big supporter of our military and men and women in uniform. So in full transparency, I let that get the best of me. And in my interview with Jordan, which was really intended to just focus on the topic of his book, I sort of unintentionally spent a lot of time on Jordan's military career because, again, I just really have a deep respect, admiration, and genuine curiosity about military life. And so we spent a lot of time talking about his military career that so much time, in fact, I just decided to just break it off into its own episode. So today, you're going to hear part 1 of my 2-part interview with Major Jordan Northrup. And in part 2, I dive into Jordan's book about his battle and victory over alcohol through his faith in Jesus Christ. But today's conversation is important as well, especially for the men listening and especially during the times that we're living in today. Because, guys, I truly believe that so much of the chaos that we're seeing in the streets of America stems from the lack of leadership in our homes. And as an officer in the Marine Corps, Jordan has incredible leadership skills that we can all learn from. We talk about the importance of servant leadership, the value of hard work, making the right decisions in life, even under difficult circumstances, and building resilience to face life's difficult challenges. So guys, I hope you enjoy this conversation. If you get anything out of it, please share this episode, give me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the show so you don't miss part 2. But until then, here is part 1 of my interview with Major Jordan Northrup. Jordan, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
Great, man. I really appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. The honor is all mine. And, I keep telling myself, for a long time, I've been telling myself, I got to do these in video. This is my side gig, so I make it as easy on myself as I possibly can. And video is just one more thing I got to deal with. But if we were on video, you would see behind me, I've got a flag in its case next to photographs of 3 grandfathers in my family who all served in World War II.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And I just a deep love and appreciation for folks like yourself who've served in the military. So before we get rolling, I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of the listeners. I think it's safe to say I can speak on their behalf. Just thank you for your service and thank you for all that you've done for our country.
You're very welcome. I appreciate it. It's my pleasure to serve.
Yeah, well, you've had a storied career, and we're going to get into that. But before we get too far, tell us about your dad life. Where are you from real quickly, and then give us your dad bio.
Yeah, so I'm from a real small town in Ohio, a place called Lima, and was born and raised there, ended up going to college in Michigan. And when I was in school there, that's when I decided to enlist inside the Marine Corps. And that was back in 2003. And since then, I've been continuing to serve. I've got 3 combat tours, 1 to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan. And my wife and I, we just celebrated our 4th anniversary, and we have a 2-year-old boy named Remington.
Oh, Remington. That's a cool name.
Yeah, yeah.
Was that inspired by anything in particular?
It actually was. So a couple years ago, I had a Marine that I commanded, and his name was Remington Hall. And I'd never heard of that before. And I was like, man, that is the coolest name I've ever heard. And so back when my wife and I were just dating, this was long before we even got engaged or married, I kept saying, if I ever have a kid, I think like Remington would be a really cool name for a boy. And so we just kind of started talking with that name as if he was a real person, and we would just kind of go with this name. So then we got married, and when we conceived, it just kind of fell into place.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of funny when a name is just kind of meant to be. It just feels right.
And it fits him very, very well. And now with a name like that, he has to be a Navy SEAL or something.
Yeah, I hear you. We, my wife and I, grew up in O'Neill, Nebraska, which is in Holt County. And so for years, we've been traveling back home. And when we enter the county where O'Neill is, Holt County, we would drive by that sign, and my wife would always say that would be a cool boy's name. And at the time, we only had 2 girls, and we never were trying to have a third. But God had plans, and so when we found out we were having a boy, Holt was the name we went with, and so now everybody hears the name Holt Henderson, and they're like, "Oh, that kid's got to be a quarterback in the NFL or something."
Absolutely.
We'll see about that. So, we've kind of danced around your military life. So let's just jump in, because I know we've got a ton to cover.
Yeah.
So you are currently a major in the United States Marine Corps.
Correct.
Let's go back to the beginning. You mentioned joining early in the early 2000s. What led you to join the military in the first place?
Sure. So kind of like you, both my grandparents were in World War II. My uncles were in Korea. My father and my uncles were also in Vietnam, but they never made a career from their service. So I always grew up kind of with the military in the background, hearing the stories, very patriotic and things like that. But when I got to college, I was working 2 jobs to support myself while I was going to school, but I had really fallen into that party kind of a lifestyle. And so I didn't really spend much of my time at my studies. And so if I wasn't at my jobs, I was either in the gym or I was partying. And so my junior and senior year kind of came around, and I hadn't had an internship. I didn't really have anything, teed up for the future. My grades were mediocre to poor, and I had a degree in economics, but nothing really to do with it. And so what happened was the year before was when 9/11 had happened. And so I had some friends that were in ROTC on campus, and they just kind of kept encouraging me like, "Hey, Jordan, you should check this out." But I was like, "Nah, this isn't for me." I mean, I was, at the time, I was 320 pounds, and
wow.
I mean, I was a portly guy. Now I'm 6'4", so I can carry.
Yeah, you're tall too.
Better, but still, I was chunky. I didn't have any confidence, and what's interesting, I was born with a stutter, and so when you kind of have that speech impediment your whole life, you just kind of train yourself to sit in the back of the room and be quiet, because you don't want to be discovered that you're different.
Yeah.
And so all those things had kind of led me to kind of just kind of maintain and coast, but never really have any real plan. So anyway, as my senior year kind of kicked off, I knew that I needed to do something different. And so I finally took my friends up on their offer, and I went down and talked to the recruiters' offices. And, I talked to all the branches, the Army and the Air Force and the Navy and stuff. But, man, when I saw those dress blues, I was like, that's it. I have got to join the Corps. So I signed up, and I had to lose the weight. But I was able to lose almost 100 pounds in a couple of months. And then that's
impressive.
Yeah, I was able to ship off to boot camp. Then my first day was October 5th, 2003.
Man. Okay. So you're post 9/11.
Yep.
And we're already in the thick of it over in the Middle East. And you're joining the Marines. That's the tip of the spear, so to speak.
Yep.
What direction did you go when you headed into the Marines?
So I went into logistics. So initially I was enlisting in the reserves. Because I still had one more year of college to finish up. It was a 5th year, kind of a semester thing, a capstone course. And so I enlisted in supply. That was going to be my job. And there was my reserve unit was in my college town, so it all kind of fit. But I had aspirations of going on to becoming an officer after that, as more of a career move.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got to boot camp, so the initial invasion into Iraq had already happened, and they were kind of coming to the tail end of the initial push. Saddam's regime had already fallen, but there was going to be a lot of cleanup work to do. So there was very good chances that we were going to get deployed. And so when you get to boot camp, it's I'm telling you, it is one of the hardest things that you're ever going to do. So Marine Corps boot camp is about 13 weeks. And it is just a complete break from everything that you've ever known. So when you get there, you arrive at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and they keep you up for a day or two straight, and they're shaving your head and giving you all your clothes and getting you your shots, and you're disoriented. You have no idea what's going on. And then that's for the first couple of days. And then you come to a Friday, and it's called Black like Friday. And that's where you get joined to your training platoon, where you meet your DIs, and they're going to be with you for the next 3 months. And so that first day it's just awful. It's just awful. They're screaming at you 24/7. I mean, there's no calendar. There's no watches. There's no way to tell time. The only way to tell time is between your meals, and then you have to count the days between church, because you're allowed to go to church on Sundays, but that's it. So it's just a training day, right? So,
yeah.
The whole goal is to just rip every sense of individuality away from you, to break you down as a person. And then once everyone is broken, and you will break, and they'll, because if you don't, they'll up the pressure until you do break. Once everyone is at a place where they're ready to be like molded, then they can rebuild you as a team and a unit.
Sure.
So
what does that breaking point look like?
It just kind of comes to the point where you stop trying to resist and maintain a sense of individuality, where you're willing to sacrifice, and you're discouraged, and you're demoralized, and you think that that you're just a worthless individual. At that point, you're ready to be trained to become part of a team.
Yeah.
And then as the training, the pressure is always increasing, but now you're training for your buddy to your left and your right. It's not about you anymore.
Yeah.
And then your buddy on your left and right, he's doing the same thing. So you're kind of bringing each other up as like a unit. So then at the end of the 3 months, you kind of had this collective mindset where it's us, not just me.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes total sense. And just to clue the listeners in right now, I am totally living vicariously through this interview, because I always wanted to be a Marine growing up. I don't know why. I was always attracted to, I don't know, maybe it was it was kind of romanticized in Hollywood and whatnot,
Sure.
But that was the path that I thought I would go down. Turns out God had other plans for me, and I don't think the Marines would have accepted me anyway, because it turns out I had a bad back and a goofy eye and flat feet, and so I don't know. That just wasn't in the cards for me. But like I said at the beginning of the show, I've just got so much respect for you guys who've gone through that and continue to go through that. And so it's always fun and interesting to kind of get a glimpse under the hood and insider stories of boot camp and quote unquote war stories. So,
oh yeah,
and we'll get into some of that. You're a major now, so kind of walk us through the progression of your career. How did you get to be a major?
Yeah, so after boot camp, you go on to, so that's 3 months. Well, then if you're in a non-combat arms job, so I was in supply, which is not, you go to 3 weeks of combat school, and you get kind of like a general sense of, land navigation. You shoot a bunch of machine guns. You can toss some grenades. You kind of do some patrolling and some tactics kind of thing, but it's more of a familiarization. And then after that, you go on to your MOS school, which is Military Occupational Specialty School, and that's where you learn your skills for the job that you've been assigned. And so mine was supply, so that's it. That school is in Camp Johnson, North Carolina. And that school can be anywhere from, depending on what you're doing, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months to even a year. And so my school, supply is not that hard. So, my school was like maybe a month and a half long. And so then I completed that. And then I went back to Michigan where I was going to school, and my reserve unit was right there in my college town. So I just checked in, and I was working my 1 weekend a month and my 2 weekends or my 2 weeks in the summer. And I was finishing out that last semester in the spring of 2004. And so I graduated with my degree in economics and philosophy in May of 2004. And once you have your degree, then you're eligible to become an officer. So then you got to go call the officer recruiter, and there's usually 1 or 2 in every state. And you put together a package, and they make sure that you're physically fit and that you don't have any convictions or misdemeanors or anything like that. Make sure that you're acceptable for what the Marine Corps is looking for as an officer. And then you put together a package, and it gets submitted to a selection board, and then you just kind of wait for the results to come in. And so, if the selection board approves your request, your application, then you're granted a seat at Officers Candidate School, or OCS, which is here at Quantico, Virginia. And then you're assigned a class. They do a couple of classes a year. There's obviously more classes in the summer and in the fall, but there's also a winter class, which is reduced personnel. They just have one company going through at a time. So there's that. And then when it's your assigned class time, and you just travel to Virginia on your own, like power, and you start your training. So Officers Candidate School is about 10 weeks long. And it is very difficult. It's physically hard. It's different from boot camp in the sense that boot camp is very much of a mental thing, because they're always on you, the pressure, the screaming, the shouting, the disorientation. They're training you to be instantly obedient to a superior's orders. As an officer, they want you to be able to think and to give the instruction, not like receive it. So the training is different. So the instructors there, they'll still shout, but they're more cold and they're more indifferent. They don't care about you. They're not trying to mold you. They want you to do the molding. So they're very much evaluating you all the time. So whether it's a physical activity, or it's a test, or it's leading the platoon in drill or something, they're always there with their clipboard in the background, writing notes about what you're doing and if you're doing it well. So there's always this pressure of, am I performing correctly? Am I doing enough? And so they exercise you for probably 3 to 4 hours a day. A lot of guys get hurt, they get broken bones, and they get sent home. And you have one shot to become an officer. Like, it's not one of these things where if you go home, then you can come back. You get one chance. And so I was there for 10 weeks. And at the 6th week point, I broke my right ankle because I've been spraining it for the previous month and a half. And so rather than going home, I went to medical and I had them tape my leg every single day, and then I just ate the pain pills until I could finish the course after like that last month. So I graduated with my commission in March of 2005. And then from there, you go on to the basic school, which is also here at Quantico, and that's a 6-month course. So if you think about OCS as like a screening, kind of a job application, okay, you made the cut, you're hired, now we have to train you. So the basic school is a 6-month training course for young officers to learn what it means to become an officer. So you learn more tactics, and you get familiarization with everything that the Marine Corps has. From there, you go on to your actual job school. So mine was logistics, which is kind of like a continuation of the supply job, just at a higher level. And that school was 4 more months long. And so finally, as a second lieutenant, I was stepping in front of my first platoon that I commanded in February of 2006.
Man. And in 2006, we're still, things are still pretty nasty over in the Middle East, and now you're commanding men.
Right.
So let's jump into that.
Okay. Yeah.
Just kind of walk us through your first deployment.
Yeah. So actually, it was really closely right after I got to what we call the fleet, which is in February of 2006. So I was assigned as a logistics officer. I was assigned to an infantry battalion, 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And so obviously the infantry battalion, what you do is you go fight. And an infantry battalion at that time was about 1,000 Marines. And we were scheduled to go on deployment that following June. So so I've been in the fleet for all of 4.5 to 5 months, commanding my Marines, and now we're on a plane going to Iraq for the first time.
And how many men were you in charge of?
75.
Okay.
And so as a logistics officer in an infantry battalion, there's only a couple of roles that you can fill. And mine was a motor transport platoon commander. So that means I commanded all the rolling stock, the trucks, the heavy trucks, the Humvees, all those vehicles. And so when we got to Iraq, we were supporting the infantry in all of their operations. So we were running all the convoys. We were doing movement of troops on and off the field of battle. We would run logistical supplies, food and water and fuel and ammunition and medical supplies from our main base out to the company positions where, because the battalion doesn't just sit in one spot, it disperses out into the area so that they can integrate into the towns and the countryside. So we would have to take supplies to them. So, we were on the road probably, almost every single day. And in that time, that was OIF 2, that was OIF 2 or 3. Insurgency was a big deal. So this is the height of the surge
right
in 2006. And where our battalion was located, it was right between Fallujah and Ramadi along the Euphrates River. And up until that point, there had not been a coalition presence in that area for a couple of years. So you can just imagine the Al-Qaeda strongholds that were in that area. And so as the infantry, it was our job to go in there and find, locate, and destroy the enemy wherever we could. And so in those 7 months that I was deployed, my Marines and I, we logged 235 combat missions.
Wow.
And so that's multiple times a day. And probably of those 235, I personally commanded maybe 115, 120 of those. And the ones that I didn't, it was my other Marines that were commanding the missions, because you just can't always be outside doing your thing. You have to have time to recover and to rest up. And so that's what we did for 7 months. We fought and we supported our infantry guys, and being on the roads and such, you're facing the improvised explosive devices. You face small arms attacks, and remember a couple times, there were we faced some mortar attacks. We were ambushed a couple times. One particular time, my vehicle actually ran over a bomb and it exploded. Our vehicle was, lifted into the air, and we came back down on like the tires, and we all had concussions, but there was no injuries beyond that. So, it was almost like a video game for 7 months.
Man.
So that deployment ended in February of 2007. And so we came back, and of my 75 guys, not one of us was hurt. The infantry battalion that we supported, they took some casualties. We had about 14 guys that were killed, 100 or so that were wounded, and out of a 1,000-person battalion, that's a lot of guys.
Yeah.
But my platoon never took a casualty. So we got back, and I attribute that to prayer and all the people that were supporting us back home in the States. So I got back to Camp Lejeune in March of 2007, and I changed to a different battalion, and found myself going back to Afghanistan the next spring, but more of a staff role. It wasn't direct combat ops with the troops this time. It was more of a coordination and like a staff role. So the danger was just much less. And so you fast forward a couple of years, you just keep deploying, and you just do your time at like each particular rank, and you get promoted. So now I got promoted to major a couple of years ago, and right now I'm at a headquarters position here at Quantico, looking at the next rank in about a year and a half.
Which is, and I'm trying to remember what the next ranking is. That Lieutenant Colonel?
Yep.
Wow, man. Good for you.
Yeah, thanks.
So obviously a lot of years invested, a lot of hard work.
Definitely.
A lot of danger. Let's go back to your Iraq deployment.
Okay.
Knowing, I guess I'm assuming after hearing that you were in some pretty hairy circumstances. Well, anytime your car gets blown up, let's just call that a hairy circumstance.
All right.
What were some, knowing that you were in charge of 75 guys or so, you're in a life-threatening situation, over and over every day, multiple times a day. What are some key takeaways from leading men in that type of scenario that you kind of took away from that? Yeah.
So there's so many things that kind of apply here. A couple of one of the phrases that we're taught as officers is that officers eat last. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a phrase, and that can be, if you peel that back, you can really apply that to so many things. And what that phrase kind of is getting at is, as a leader, as an officer, you wear the power. You have the authority on your collar. You can order men to charge that machine gun nest. You are in charge, but with that charge comes a great responsibility that you have to look out for the welfare of your men. And so when you say officers eat last, in the most literal of terms, if you're all going to the chow hall, you make sure that they eat ahead of you. That means that if you're out there on a mission and it's time to circle the vehicles and sleep for the night, you make sure that they get more sleep than you. If there's new gear to be had, or there's food to pass out, or there's resources, you make sure that your Marines are taken care of before you take care of yourself. You don't ever want to put yourself in a position to take something from one of your junior Marines. Whether that's food, time, it could be like water, sleep, anything. You are always you always put yourself last, because you have the authority, because you do make more of an income than like they do. You're supposed to sacrifice yourself so that they can gain.
Yeah. And I would imagine that helps gain or, earn trust and build loyalty amongst the ranks.
Absolutely. And so I took that a little bit. I kind of coined a different phrase when I was taking command for the first time. I had my Marines together, and I said that, two things that you can expect from me. That if you have to work late, I will work late as well. And I will never give you an order that I will not do myself. And so that means if I was in like the strictest of sense, if I told them to charge the machine gun nest, I'd be right there with them.
Yeah.
So, and when your Marines see that, they see that you're not just this guy sitting in the ivory tower who's giving direction but never getting his hands dirty as well. When they see you right next to them, suffering the same way that like they are, that builds camaraderie and what we call esprit de corps. That sense of like unity, that bond. And when you're shoulder to shoulder, side by side, going into the fight with like your men, that's why you fight for your buddy to your left and your right. And so when your Marines will see that, then they know that they can count on you as a leader, and they'll follow you, especially when you have to give those tough calls like, hey, we have to do this mission. And it's, it could be a dangerous one. We might not all come home. They will accept that order because of who you are. I was going to say another thing that I learned was ownership. And so we talk about that word. We kind of pay it a lip service somewhat, but if you think about that word, ownership, in a military standpoint, as an officer, you are responsible for everything that your unit does and fails to do. It is your fault. Now, does that mean, and you can walk this all the way back. So if the young Marine in the fight, he makes a mistake. Now, someone could say, like an officer, well, I wasn't even there. That wasn't my fault. I didn't make the mistake. Okay, but let's think about this. So that young Marine, he's on the front line. He makes a mistake. Well, who's in charge of training him? Who's in charge of making sure that he knew what his roles were? Who's in charge of making sure that his immediate supervisor knew what his job was? Who's in charge of making sure that that Marine had the right gear and the right equipment? Who's in charge of making sure that that Marine was physically fit so that he could withstand the rigors of combat? So you can see how we can walk it all back to keep going higher and higher and higher. And ultimately it comes back to that officer. It's you might not be there on the front line when the mistake happens, but you have set the conditions in the environment that allow that mistake to happen in the first place. And so by taking that extreme sense of like ownership and pushing it down, you can really affect change at like the lowest level. So I would say that those are probably some of the biggest like life lessons that I learned. And those things transcend the military. Those things apply in corporate America, in entrepreneurship, in academia, being able to sacrifice for yourself or sacrifice yourself for your Marines, for your wife, for your kids, for your employees, for your sports team, for your church, for your students, whatever it is. And that sense of ownership, it just applies across a host of things.
Yeah, 100%. The whole time you were talking there, I was just thinking, I was drawing the connecting the dots between what you were saying and my role in corporate America, like you said, but also fatherhood. And, you talk about officers eat last, or I've heard it phrased, leaders eat last. And it's just that ultimate form of servant leadership, right? You're literally serving others, or leading others, I should say, by serving them.
Yep.
And like we talked about, it just builds so much trust and camaraderie. And there may be times where you have to give an order, whether it's on the battlefield or whether it's at home. If they've seen you do it alongside them in the past, and there may be a time where you aren't able to do it, then at least they know, well, he's not asking me to do something he wouldn't do himself, or he hasn't done with me already. So I'm more willing to do this for you because I know where your heart lies.
Absolutely. 100%.
And yeah, and I think the ownership piece is so huge, and I think that is, in my experience anyway, really a mark of maturity, right? Because when your feet are held to the fire and you're being held accountable for whatever wrong that may have happened. I mean, it's so easy to just cast blame on somebody else, right? But it really takes a man to step up and say, you know what? I know, Billy is the one that made the mistake, but it really falls on me because I didn't equip him to do his job right, or give him the right equipment, or whatever the case may be, to really just step up and take that bullet for him, so to speak. And that's probably a bad analogy, but
no, that's absolutely right. And you know what? Our ego hates that. It hates it. And if that's something else too, if we can learn to check the ego and how we view ourselves, and when you say like, no, that was my fault, everyone's gonna be like, okay, well, he's just saying that because, he's just falling on his sword here. No, like, it's really your fault. Say that and you own it. That's powerful. But our ego hates it and it fights it all the time. And that's why these things, this sense of ownership, you have to work at it. It's not like you're born with it and you have it or you don't. It's a learned thing, and it constantly takes like work. And even now, I've been doing this for 17 years. Every day I'm faced with choices. Hey, do I have to own this? Do I not? Do I take the easy way out? Do I do an extra set in the gym? Do I run the extra mile? Do I do the dishes for my wife when I'm exhausted at night? Or do I just go to bed? Do I take the extra step to play with my son, even though I would prefer to be doing this? All those decisions we have all day long, where you can take the ownership or take the easy way. Mm-hmm. Our ego and our sense of self always wants the path of least resistance. But that doesn't refine you. That's not going to help you. That won't make you stronger. Taking the harder path is not fun, but it's the better path.
Oh, that is so true. And that is a lesson I try to instill in my kids, that I remind them all the time, when you're going through life, you're always going to come into a fork in the road. You can do the right thing or the wrong thing. And 99.9% of the time, the right thing is the harder thing to do.
It's always the harder thing.
Yeah.
But you know what? It gets easier though, because, you can build those like reps and sets, and your muscles get stronger and you build your endurance. And when you take that harder path, you've suffered a little bit. Well, then the next time it's not so bad. Right.
Right.
And so,
yep.
And that's how these, guys in the military, like, look at these like SEALs or Force Reconnaissance or the Rangers or the Green Berets. These guys do incredible things, but they work at it. They work at it all the time. And so, when you're operating at that level of peak performance, physically or mentally, they've worked themselves out in so many ways for years, and they've trained to that standard, so that when they're faced with the real thing in battle and the bullets begin to fly, well, it's not so hard anymore.
Yeah. As you're just mentioning that, I got to thinking back to, I don't know if you ever played football, but I played football in high school anyway. And it was like, the first 2 weeks of practice just sucked because it was physically grueling, but then you're also conditioning your body to getting hit. And every hit it just hurts, especially those hits that where you maybe catch a face mask on your arm bone or whatnot. But then, by the end of the season, your body is so conditioned to that pain that a hit that would have sent you through the roof the first week or two of practice, you barely even notice. And I just remember, getting out afterwards, after a game, taking off my jersey, and I might have like just a massive bruise on my arm and have no recollection of how that got there.
Yep.
And it's similar to what you're talking about. If you condition yourself to these struggles and these challenges, they're going to get easier and easier over time. And so doing the right thing, taking the hard path, it becomes easier.
So I'll tell you a funny story from boot camp that speaks to this. So this was probably on that very first day, that Black Friday day. And so this is San Diego, and it's August 8th. It's about 9 degrees outside. And of course, inside the squad bay, there's no air conditioning. That just doesn't happen. Basic training, so it's hot. So we're all in our squad bay, and the DIs, they have us put on our sweatsuit, Then they have us put on our camis, our like uniform over top of the sweatsuit. Then they have us put on our Gore-Tex like jacket, which is kind of like the raincoat that we have. Then we take our
This sounds miserable.
Yeah, then we take our blankets, our sheets and the blankets off of the bed, drape them around our necks, and then dump our foot lockers into our sea bags, put those on our backs, and then we're running from the bathroom, the shower room to the front of the squad bay, back and forth. This is like we had 93 guys in our squad and our boot camp platoon. So 93 guys in a squad bay that really isn't all that big. It's like the size of a fellowship hall at a small church, running back and forth, sweating and slipping and sliding around for hours. And every time they'd shout, you would have to scream back at the top of your lungs whatever they wanted you to scream all afternoon. And so, I mean, you're sweating so much. Your clothes are drenched. Your socks are drenched. Your boots are drenched because of all the sweat that's pooling in like your socks. I mean, it is just miserable. And then they'll make you dump like the sea bag off of your back onto the squad bay floor, and you have to low crawl in this like circle around and around and around. Your knees are getting like beat up, and you're screaming at the top of your lungs. You're just like, what have I got myself into? This is miserable. Just miserable. But you know what? After that first day, it's going to end. You're going to get dinner. You're going to get a shower. You're going to get 8 hours of sleep. And then the next day is not so hard. And then the next after that, it's not so hard. And so, the first time you experience something like that, it's shocking. It's culture shock. You just don't know how to deal with it. It's awful. You hate it. You never enjoy it, but you get used to it. And used to it, you get strong.
Yeah.
And your resilience grows and builds. So by the end of boot camp, and then extrapolate that through a combat deployment, the things that would stress you out as a civilian, as a Marine coming back from the battlefield, it's like, yeah, it's no big deal anymore. I've like suffered worse. And you find that you can just endure and bear so much more than your average American can because of what you've had to go through.
And that's a wrap on part 1 of my interview with Major Jordan Northrup. Guys, if you got anything out of today's message, be sure to share this episode, leave a review, and subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss out on part 2. Also, be sure to check out the Inspired Legacy Facebook group. There's a link to the group in today's show notes, as well as a link to check out Jordan's book, The War Inside, which we're going to dive into in the next episode. So until next time, live inspired.